The frost-covered forest outside Neuville, Belgium held a deadly silence on that December morning in 1944, specifically the 19th day of the month. It was 23 minutes past 6 in the morning when Unteroffizier Klaus Wendel hunched inside the cramped turret of his Panther tank, his breath crystallizing in white puffs as he wrestled with a pencil made stiff by the freezing temperatures. He was trying to document something in his personal notebook, something that had been bothering him and his fellow tankers for days now. The Americans, he wrote with difficulty, had deployed some kind of new predator on the battlefield. German crews could hear these machines moving through the forests and across the frozen landscape, their engines producing a distinctive high-pitched sound, but by the time anyone could actually spot them and get their guns oriented in the right direction, these mysterious vehicles had already disappeared. Just the previous day, 3 of the supposedly invincible Tiger tanks had been destroyed by these phantom attackers. Wendel peered through the commander's cupola of his Panther, scanning the darkness of the Ardennes forest in the pre-dawn hours, knowing that somewhere beyond those shadowy tree lines, the American 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion had already positioned their M18 Hellcats for the coming engagement. What Wendel couldn't possibly know was that in just 17 minutes, everything he thought he understood about tank combat, everything the Wehrmacht had learned and perfected through 5 brutal years of warfare across Europe and North Africa, was about to be completely upended by an American fighting vehicle that violated every single principle of proper armoured warfare. The Panther tank that Wendel commanded was armed with a 75mm gun capable of punching through any American tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Its frontal armor could bounce off most Allied shells without difficulty. This tank represented what German engineering could accomplish when pushed to its limits, a heavy, powerful, methodical fighting machine. Yet within just 3 minutes of making contact with the enemy that morning, Wendel would watch in horror as multiple German tanks were systematically destroyed by American vehicles moving at speeds that German armor couldn't even achieve on paved highways, let alone cross-country through forests and snow. The Battle of the Bulge had entered its 4th day of fighting, and all across the frozen forests stretching through Belgium and Luxembourg, German tank crews were coming to a terrifying realization. The Americans had constructed something entirely different, something that hunted in ways that no armoured vehicle in history had ever hunted before. These weren't stronger machines, they weren't more heavily protected, they were simply faster than anything the Germans believed could survive on an active battlefield. The story of how the M18 Hellcat came into existence actually begins back in December of 1941. Right as America was being pulled into the global conflict. While German tank design philosophy had evolved from principles emphasizing overwhelming firepower combined with heavy protection, leading to the development of 45-ton Panthers and the truly massive 69.8-ton King Tiger tanks, American designers working at General Motors took an approach so radically different that it would end up terrifying German crews 3 years down the road. The Tank Destroyer Force came into being under a directive from General Leslie McNair on November 21, 1941. The operating principle was elegantly simple and documented in Field Manual FM 18-5, which emphasized seeking out enemy armor, striking it hard, and destroying it completely. The emphasis fell heavily on speed and firepower while deliberately minimizing armor protection. The M18, which carried the designation T-70 during its development phase, would embody this philosophy to such an extreme degree that German tank designers would have considered it suicidal. The Buick Motor Division plant in Flint, Michigan, received the contract in January 1942. Chief Engineer Joseph Roberts found himself facing specifications that seemed to contradict each other in fundamental ways. He needed to mount a high-velocity 76mm gun with enough punch to destroy any German tank currently known, maintain a low profile that would allow the vehicle to hide effectively, and achieve speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour, all while keeping the total weight under 20 tons. The solution that emerged defied every conventional principle of tank design. The M18's armour measured a mere 25.4 millimetres at its very thickest point on the turret front, with the hull front protected by just 12.7 millimetres, barely sufficient to stop heavy machine gun fire. An 88mm shell from a German tank wouldn't just penetrate this armour, it would pass completely through both sides of the vehicle. The entire design prioritised mobility above absolutely everything else. The real proving ground came during the breakout from Normandy, where German tank crews encountered what would become their worst nightmare. On July 29, 1944, near the French town of Coutances, elements from German heavy tank battalions started filing disturbing reports about engagements with American tank destroyers that vanished before the Germans could even return fire. The after-action reports documented enemy vehicles moving at speeds estimated at around 80 km per hour over rough terrain, with total engagement times from first shot to final sighting lasting approximately 180 seconds. The mathematics were brutally simple and absolutely terrifying for German crews. A Panther tank's turret needed a full 60 seconds to complete one full rotation. The tank's maximum speed reached 34 miles per hour on roads, dropping to just 15 miles per hour when moving cross-country. The M18 Hellcat could accelerate from a standing start to 30 miles per hour in 7 seconds, maintain 55 miles per hour on roads, reach 60 miles per hour if the governor was removed, and sustain 26 miles per hour while moving cross-country through rough terrain. In the 3 minutes it took a German crew to identify where the threat was coming from, rotate their turret to face it, acquire the target properly, and fire their gun, the Hellcat could displace itself nearly 1.5 miles away from its firing position. The fear that German crews felt wasn't irrational or based on panic. The M18's 76mm M1A2 gun couldn't penetrate the frontal armour of a Panther tank with standard M62 APCBC ammunition. That much was true, but it could easily defeat the 40mm side armour at ranges up to 1,500 metres. With the M93 HVAP tungsten core rounds, though these were severely limited in supply with crews typically receiving only 1 or 2 rounds monthly, penetration capability reached 157mm at 500 yards. The gun's muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second meant the shell would arrive at the target before the sound of the shot firing could reach German ears. German doctrine emphasized methodical engagement tactics, careful target acquisition, deliberate aiming procedures, and conservation of ammunition. Crews drilled extensively on fighting from static positions, using terrain features to create hull-down placements where only the turret was exposed. The Panther and Tiger tanks were specifically designed to support this doctrine. They were heavily armoured, mounted powerful guns, and advanced slowly but steadily. The Hellcat shattered every single aspect of this carefully developed training. M18 crews received their instruction at Camp Hood, Texas, a facility established specifically as the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center on 158,706 acres of land. They were taught to never remain stationary for more than 30 seconds after firing their gun. The motto that became standard doctrine was simple and direct: speed is life. Where German doctrine emphasized making the one decisive shot that would knock out the enemy, American tank destroyer doctrine preached the principle of shoot and scoot. Between July 1943 and October 1944, the Buick plant in Flint, Michigan produced exactly 2,507 M18 Hellcats, far fewer than the originally planned 8,986 vehicles. Production included 6 pilot models, an initial contract covering 1,000 vehicles, and a final order for 1,507 units. Peak monthly production reached 267 units in November 1943. While this production rate appeared modest compared to Sherman tank output, it still exceeded German Panther production numbers. While Germany struggled to produce 90 Panthers monthly by late 1944, the American factories had already completed their entire Hellcat production run. This disparity meant that while German crews knew each lost Panther or Tiger was essentially irreplaceable given the state of German industry, American forces could rapidly replace any losses from their vast industrial capacity. The M18 featured a Wright R975 radial engine that had originally been designed for aircraft applications. Early production vehicles, those with serial numbers from 1 to 1,350, used the naturally aspirated R975C1 variant, producing 350 horsepower, while later models, serial numbers 1,000, 351 through 2,507, received the supercharged R975C4, generating 400 horsepower beginning in March 1944. This power output, combined with the vehicle's weight ranging from 17.7 to 20 tons depending on sources and configuration, created an exceptional power-to-weight ratio. The Hellcat achieved 32.5 horsepower per ton compared to the Panther's 15 horsepower per ton. The Hellcat's high-dramatic automatic transmission with torque converter allowed drivers to maintain maximum speed while maneuvering, a critical advantage over German tanks that required manual shifting and clutch operation during combat. The ground pressure of just 10.5 pounds per square inch, less than many wheeled vehicles, meant Hellcats could traverse mud and snow that would completely immobilize the 57-ton Tiger Washi with its 15.2 psi ground pressure and the 69.8-ton Tiger II. The breakout from Normandy in August 1944 provided the first large-scale demonstration of what Hellcat doctrine could accomplish. During Operation Cobra, which began on July 28, 1944, the 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion, which had received their M18s back in October 1943 and landed at Utah Beach on July 21st and 22nd, participated in the sweep through Brittany. The 704th and 705th Battalions, also equipped with M18, joined in the rapid advance. Traditional tank warfare doctrine would have dictated careful, covered approaches followed by sustained firefights. Instead, M18 crews executed what became known as rapid flanking attacks, using their superior speed to strike from completely unexpected directions before German turrets could traverse to meet the new threat. The Battle of Aracourt, fought from September 18th to 29th, 1944, near the Nancy bridgehead across the Moselle River, demonstrated the M18's full potential when properly employed according to its intended doctrine. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to the 4th Armoured Division's Combat Command A, faced elements of the German 113th Panzer Brigade in conditions that should have heavily favoured the defenders. On September 19th, Lieutenant Edwin Leiper's platoon engaged German armour in heavy fog at extremely close range, with visibility limited to just 30 feet. In the first 5 minutes of this chaotic engagement, his M18s destroyed 5 German tanks while losing just 1 vehicle. The engagement continued with 10 additional enemy tanks destroyed for the loss of 2 more M18. Captain Tom Evans earned the Distinguished Service Cross after personally manning a disabled M18's gun to destroy enemy panzers. The overall results at Aracourt were absolutely staggering. 39 German tanks destroyed for 4 M18s lost and 3 damaged, producing a 5.6 to 1 kill ratio that completely validated the tank destroyer concept. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 became the Hellcats' most legendary proving ground. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion, which General A.D. Bruce described as the finest tank destroyer battalion yet trained, rushed to defend Bastogne, providing critical armoured support for the surrounded 101st Airborne Division. On December 19th to 20th, 1944, near Neuville, M18S from both the 609th and 705th Tank Destroyer Battalions engaged elements of the 2nd Panzer Division. The 609th arrived first with Team de Sobry. The 705th would later receive a Presidential Unit Citation for their actions at Bastogne from December 18th to 27th, 1944. On Christmas Day, 1944 alone, the 705th destroyed 27 German tanks while losing 6 M18s during engagements with the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division, maintaining their exceptional kill ratios even during the most desperate fighting imaginable. Overall, during the siege of Bastogne, the 705th destroyed approximately 40 German tanks for 6 M18 losses, achieving a 6.7 to 1 kill ratio. The Hellcats' advantages actually increased during adverse weather conditions. While German heavy tanks struggled terribly in mud and snow, the M18's lightweight construction and low ground pressure allowed them to maintain mobility. During the opening phase of the bulge, heavy fog grounded all air support and limited visibility to under 100 meters. German doctrine relied heavily on their long-range gunnery superiority, which was now completely negated by the weather. Hellcat crews, who had been trained specifically for close-range ambush tactics at Camp Hood's Revolutionary Battle Conditioning course, actually thrived in these conditions. The M18's lightweight construction provided strategic mobility that German heavy tanks simply couldn't match. While a King Tiger required Class 70 bridges, which were extremely rare throughout Europe, the M18 could cross basically any structure capable of supporting a loaded truck. This advantage proved absolutely decisive during the Rhine crossing operations. While German heavy tanks searched desperately for intact bridges strong enough to support their massive weight, Hellcats crossed on temporary structures erected by combat engineers in just hours. While American factories constructed 2,507 M18 Hellcats between July 1943 and October 1944, Germany struggled throughout the entire war to produce heavy tanks in any meaningful numbers. Total Panther production reached approximately 6,000 vehicles across the war, while only 492 King Tigers and 1,347 Tiger Ears were ever built. The mathematics of industrial capacity were absolutely inescapable. For every Panther that Germany produced, America built 8 tank destroyers and dozens of medium tanks. German tank crews faced not just superior tactics and training, but completely overwhelming numbers. American wartime production included 49,234 M4 Sherman tanks, 2,507 M18 Hellcats, 2,324 M10 tank destroyers, 2,073 M36 tank destroyers, plus 88,410 other armoured vehicles of various types. By late 1944, veteran German tank crews were becoming increasingly rare. Replacement crews received minimal training, sometimes just 2 weeks of instruction, before being thrown into combat against experienced Allied forces. American Hellcat crews, conversely, received extensive training at Camp Hood, later renamed Fort Hood, in Texas. The Tank Destroyer School's program included 17 weeks of intensive training, with heavy emphasis placed on speed, mobility, and individual initiative. The facility, commanded initially by Lieutenant Colonel and later Brigadier General Andrew D. Bruce, could train 100,000 soldiers simultaneously with 28 battalions and 8 groups in various stages of preparation. Crews practiced high-speed firing while moving, rapid displacement after engagement, and coordinated attacks until these tactics became completely instinctive. The Revolutionary Battle Conditioning course, originally called the Tank Hunting course, became the first U.S. Army training program to employ live fire overhead during exercises, with trainees spending a full week in simulated combat conditions with real ammunition cracking over their heads. By late 1944, American tank destroyer doctrine had evolved significantly from its initial theoretical concepts to proven combat techniques. Field Manual FM 18-5, published in June 1942, stated clearly that there was only one battle objective for tank destroyer units, and that was the destruction of hostile tanks. General Bruce later clarified that seek meant conducting vigorous reconnaissance to locate enemy armour, strike meant achieving destruction through accurate gunfire rather than physically charging the enemy, and destroy meant complete elimination through superior tactics and training. Combat experience in North Africa had modified these concepts significantly. Early battles taught harsh lessons that pure offensive charges were suicidal against prepared German positions. Instead, aggressive spirit needed to be combined with stealth and deception to become the cornerstone of successful tank-destroyer employment. M18 crews developed what became known as Wolfpack tactics, where 3 or 4 Hellcats would operate in coordinated but independent attacks, communicating constantly by radio to create overlapping fields of fire, while maintaining constant movement to avoid becoming targets themselves. By the war's end, M18 Hellcat units had achieved truly remarkable combat statistics. The Army Historical Foundation documents 526 total enemy armoured vehicle kills, with 498 in the European theatre, 17 in Italy and 11 in the Pacific theatre. With approximately 216 M18s lost to enemy fire in the European theatre specifically, this produced an overall kill-to-loss ratio of 2.4 to 1, or 2.3 to 1 in Europe specifically, which was the highest ratio achieved by any US tank or tank destroyer during the entire Second World War. Individual unit achievements often exceeded these already impressive averages by substantial margins. The 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion destroyed upwards of 90 enemy armoured fighting vehicles during their combat service. The 704th achieved similar numbers, with their Aracourt engagement alone accounting for 39 confirmed kills. The 705th's performance at Bastogne, destroying 40 tanks while losing just 6, demonstrated sustained excellence over an extended period under the worst possible conditions. The 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion achieved the highest documented ratio at nearly 23 to 1, though this was over a smaller sample size. Loss analysis revealed some interesting patterns. 40 to 50% of M18 casualties resulted from enemy tanks and anti-tank guns exploiting the vehicle's minimal armour protection, while 25 to 35% stemmed from mechanical breakdowns in the field. The remaining losses came from infantry anti-tank weapons, artillery bombardment, and mines. The fundamental difference between German and American armoured vehicle design philosophy becomes crystal clear when directly comparing specifications. The Panther weighed exactly 44.8 to 45 tons, with 80 millimeters of frontal armour sloped at 55 degrees. The Tiger the Fern weighed 57 tons with 150 millimeters of sloped frontal armour and 180 millimeters protecting the turret. Against this impressive protection, the M18 Hellcat weighed just 17.7 to 20 tons, depending on configuration, with armour ranging from 12.7 millimeters on the hull front to 25.4 millimeters on the turret front, thinner than some German armoured cars. Yet this apparent vulnerability enabled the speed that became its primary defensive characteristic. At a range of 500 meters, a Hellcat moving perpendicular to the line of fire at 40 miles per hour would cross a Tiger's gun arc in just 4.5 seconds, faster than the gunner could manually track the target after hydraulic traverse failure, which was a common combat occurrence with German tanks. Beyond raw speed, the M18 demonstrated superior mechanical reliability compared to German heavy tanks under field conditions. The Wright R975 radial engine, derived from proven aircraft designs, started reliably even in sub-zero temperatures without extensive preparation. German tank crews, using diesel engines that required careful warm-up procedures especially in winter, couldn't understand how Hellcats could start instantly and accelerate immediately to maximum speed. The Panther's sophisticated transmission system, while technically quite advanced on paper, proved fragile under actual combat conditions. Final drive failures plagued the design throughout its entire service life and were never fully resolved. The Tiger II's mechanical complexity meant that more of these massive tanks were lost to mechanical failure and abandonment than were actually destroyed by enemy action. Meanwhile, the M18's simplified design, which used proven automotive components wherever possible rather than developing new specialized parts, ensured consistently high operational readiness rates. American logistical superiority amplified the M18's effectiveness tremendously. While German tanks often sat idle for extended periods due to lack of fuel, spare parts, or ammunition, Hellcat units maintained high operational rates through efficient supply chains that kept them fed with everything they needed. The famous Red Ball Express and similar logistics operations ensured consistent fuel deliveries to forward units, while standardized parts across American vehicles meant easy field maintenance without waiting for specialized components. German forces, by late 1944, faced absolutely chronic fuel shortages that severely limited operational mobility. Operation Watch on the Rhine, the German code name for the Ardennes offensive, was partially aimed at capturing Allied fuel dumps because German strategic supplies simply couldn't sustain prolonged mobile operations. This fuel situation meant German tanks increasingly fought defensively from static positions, which was exactly the scenario where the mobile Hellcat held maximum tactical advantage. Every M18 carried both radio and intercom systems that worked reliably under field conditions, with the SCR 528 radio sets providing consistent communication between vehicles. German tanks, especially by late 1944 as equipment quality degraded, often operated with damaged or completely non-functional communications equipment, forcing them to rely on signal flags or pre-battle planning without the ability to adjust during combat. This seemingly minor technical detail had major tactical implications on the battlefield. Hellcat platoons could coordinate their attacks in real time, adjusting instantly to German responses and exploiting any opportunities that emerged. When 4 Hellcats attacked from different directions, they operated as a single coordinated organism through constant radio communication. German tanks, often fighting in communication isolation from their neighboring vehicles, simply couldn't match this level of tactical flexibility and coordination. Before the Hellcats' legendary performance in northwest Europe, the Italian campaign had actually provided German forces with their first clear warnings about this new threat. In May 1944, during the breakout from the Anzio beachhead, the 894th Tank Destroyer Battalion's Hellcats faced elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division in close terrain. The landscape of rolling hills covered with vineyards and stone walls should have completely neutralized the M18's speed advantage according to conventional thinking. Instead, it actually amplified the psychological impact these vehicles had on German crews. The Hellcats used their ability to accelerate up 30-degree slopes at speeds German tanks couldn't achieve on flat ground, creating an almost supernatural illusion of omnipresence by appearing at multiple points along ridgelines in rapid succession. This early demonstration of Hellcat capabilities in Italy went largely unheeded by German high command, who remained primarily focused on the Eastern Front where the vast majority of German armour was committed against Soviet forces. Winter 1944 to 1945 proved conclusively that the Hellcats' advantages actually increased during adverse weather conditions rather than being diminished. The M18's wide tracks and lightweight, producing just 10.5 psi ground pressure, allowed movement through snow and mud that trapped much heavier vehicles. German Tigers and Panthers, already struggling with chronic mechanical reliability issues, found their mobility further reduced by winter conditions in the Ardennes. During the Battle of the Bulge, Hellcat crews exploited these conditions with expert skill. They used their superior speed to race through areas where German heavy tanks inevitably bogged down in the snow, appearing behind German lines in locations where heavy armour was thought to be physically impossible. This ability to maintain mobility in poor conditions contributed significantly to the successful defence of Bastogne and other key positions. German forces attempted various counter-tactics to deal with the Hellcat threat as they began to understand what they were facing. Updated tactical manuals recommended immediate smoke deployment whenever M18s were identified, essentially blinding their own forces in the desperate hope that the threat would simply pass by. Other desperate measures included welding additional track links to the side armour of Panthers, though these were completely ineffective against 76mm rounds, and creating deliberate ambushes with hidden anti-tank guns positioned to catch Hellcats by surprise. Nothing worked consistently given the tactical situation. The Hellcats' combination of speed, firepower, and tactical flexibility proved essentially insurmountable with the resources available to German forces in late 1944. The vehicle's very presence in a sector altered German command behaviour significantly. Commanders became increasingly reluctant to commit their precious remaining armour without conducting extensive reconnaissance first, which meant sacrificing initiative and operational momentum. In March 1945, near Remagen, M18S from the 656th Tank Destroyer Battalion crossed the captured Ludendorff Bridge while it was too structurally damaged for heavier vehicles to risk crossing. They established a defensive screen on the east bank that destroyed 11 German tanks attempting to approach and destroy the bridge, including 2 King Tigers that couldn't maneuver quickly enough in the confined terrain near the river. This action demonstrated perfectly the strategic value of the M18's lightweight construction. While German heavy tanks required specific routes and specially reinforced bridges to cross rivers, Hellcats could use any crossing that could support regular truck traffic, allowing them to appear in supposedly impossible locations behind German defensive lines. April 1945 saw the Ruhr Pocket become a massive trap for German Army Group B, which was completely encircled. The 893rd Tank Destroyer Battalion's Hellcats conducted what military historians consider exemplary tank destroyer operations during this period, racing through collapsing German defensive lines at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour on the cleared autobahn sections, appearing deep in German rear areas before commanders even knew the front line had been penetrated. These final operations of the war in Europe demonstrated the M18 concept brought to full tactical maturity. Speed as an offensive weapon, mobility serving as effective armour, surprise as the primary tactic. German defensive positions that had been carefully designed to stop deliberate attacks by heavy tanks proved completely useless against vehicles that simply raced around them at highway speeds before the defenders could properly react. Post-war analysis conducted by US Army historians validated the M18 concept despite its obvious limitations. The 76mm gun's inability to penetrate Panther or Tiger frontal armour with standard ammunition absolutely forced reliance on flanking attacks and ambush tactics, missions where the vehicle's exceptional speed became absolutely essential to survival. With standard M62 APCBC rounds achieving only 93mm of penetration at 500 yards and the highly effective HVAP rounds being extremely scarce, crews had no choice but to close to what would normally be considered suicidal ranges for frontal engagements against German heavy tanks. Yet the combat record speaks absolutely definitively about the vehicle's effectiveness. 526 confirmed kills against 216 combat losses produced the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armoured vehicle deployed during World War II. This remarkable success came not from superior firepower or better protection, but from the revolutionary employment of speed and mobility combined with superior crew training and aggressive tactics. The M18 Hellcat represented far more than just another armoured vehicle in the Allied arsenal. It embodied a completely different conceptual approach to armoured warfare itself. While Germany perfected the tank as a breakthrough weapon and mobile fortress, emphasizing protection and firepower above all else, America created something genuinely new on the battlefield. The tank destroyer as a pure hunter, a predator, rather than a brawler. The tank destroyer force's official motto of seek, strike, and destroy proved remarkably prophetic. By war's end, American tank destroyer battalions collectively claimed over 11,000 enemy vehicles destroyed in total across all theatres, with Hellcat units consistently achieving the highest kill-to-loss ratios. The doctrine emphasized repeatedly that tank destroyers were fundamentally not tanks and absolutely shouldn't attempt to fight like tanks in sustained engagements. They were hunters that struck from carefully prepared ambush positions and then vanished before the enemy could effectively respond. Beyond purely tactical success on individual battlefields, the Hellcat achieved significant strategic effects at the operational level. German armoured reserves, instead of being concentrated for offensive operations as doctrine preferred, were increasingly held back in defensive positions to guard against potential tank destroyer raids. The mere confirmed presence of Hellcat units in a particular sector could freeze German armoured movement for hours, while commanders desperately sought verification of their exact locations and strength. During the Ardennes offensive, intercepted German communications revealed commanders specifically requesting verification that no Hellcats were present in their planned axis of advance before they would commit their armoured reserves. Precious hours were lost to additional reconnaissance, operational momentum sacrificed to tactical caution. The offensive that was supposed to split the Allied forces and potentially change the strategic situation was partially paralysed by fear of vehicles weighing less than half what a Panther weighed. The 2,507 Hellcats that were built represented American industrial philosophy perfectly. The goal wasn't perfection in every detail, but practical efficiency that could be mass-produced. While Germany built 6,000 Panthers over a 3-year period, constantly struggling with quality control issues and component shortages that limited production, Buick produced the entire M18 run in just 15 months using proven components and simplified construction techniques. German engineers, when they had the opportunity to examine captured M18s, noted what they considered apparent crudity in construction. Functional welds rather than perfect joints, armor plates showing obvious tool marks, interior ergonomics that seemed almost accidental rather than carefully planned. Yet this supposedly crude vehicle consistently destroyed German tanks that had been built with almost watchmaker precision and careful attention to detail. The fundamental difference lay in overall design philosophy and production goals. Germany built what were essentially engineering monuments, showcases of technical capability, while America built practical tools designed to win a war through overwhelming numbers and solid performance. Behind all the impressive statistics and tactical analysis lay genuine human tragedy on both sides of this conflict. Young German tankers, many of them still teenagers by 1945 as casualties mounted and replacements grew younger, faced an enemy that completely negated everything they had been carefully taught in their abbreviated training. Their meticulously maintained Panthers and Tigers, representing the absolute peak of German military engineering, burned just as readily when struck by Hellcat rounds fired from ambush positions they never saw. American crews, while suffering far fewer losses thanks to their superior tactics and training, carried their own psychological burdens from this type of warfare. The speed that ultimately saved their lives also meant striking without any warning, often giving German crews absolutely no chance to surrender or even escape their burning vehicles. The minimal armour protection meant that when M18s were hit by enemy fire, catastrophic losses often resulted with the entire crew killed instantly, though the open-topped turret design actually improved overall crew survival rates to over 80% compared to just 35% for German heavy tank crews trapped in enclosed turrets. The M18 Hellcats' influence extended well beyond World War II into post-war military thinking. Armies around the world studied its employment carefully, recognizing that mobility could actually trump heavy protection under certain tactical circumstances. Modern military doctrine's heavy emphasis on shoot and scoot tactics, rapid displacement after engagement, and mobility as a primary survival technique all trace their conceptual roots directly back to M18 employment during 1944 and 1945. Today at Fort Moore, which was formerly known as Fort Benning before the recent name change, a carefully restored M18 Hellcat stands at the entrance to the Armour School. Its commemorative plaque describes it as the fastest armoured fighting vehicle of World War II, and proof that American ingenuity combined with mass production capability could defeat what appeared to be superior enemy equipment through innovative tactics. The The final accounting of the M18 Hellcat in World War II makes for impressive reading. Production total manufactured was 2,507 vehicles. The production period ran from July 1943 to October 1944, a span of just 15 months. Peak production reached 267 units during November 1943. The unit cost in 1943 dollars was $57,500 per vehicle. The production location was Buick Division in Flint, Michigan. Looking at performance specifications, maximum speed reached 55 miles per hour with the governor in place, 60 miles per hour if the governor was removed. Acceleration from 0 to 30 miles per hour took just 7 seconds. Operational range was 100 to 105 miles, depending on terrain. Power-to-weight ratio ranged from 20 to 22.5 horsepower per ton. Ground pressure was 10.5 psi. The combat record shows enemy vehicles destroyed totaling 526 confirmed kills. M18S lost to enemy fire numbered 216. Overall kill ratio was 2.4 to 1. The European theatre ratio specifically was 2.3 to 1. For comparison, German tank specifications tell an interesting story. The Panther weighed 44.8 to 45 tons, achieved 15 horsepower per ton, and had a maximum speed of 34 miles per hour. The Tiger weighed 57 tons, featured 100mm frontal armour, and only 1,347 were produced during the entire war. The Tiger II weighed a massive 69.8 tons, boasted 150mm frontal armour, and a mere 492 were ever produced. The supreme irony running through the entire Hellcat story is that German doctrine itself actually created the ideal conditions for the M18's success. By building increasingly heavy tanks like the Panther, Tiger, and King Tiger, Germany created slow, road-bound targets that were absolutely perfect for Hellcat hit-and-run tactics. Had Germany instead continued developing lighter, more mobile tanks that could match the Hellcat's speed, the American vehicle's advantages would have been significantly minimized. Every additional ton added to German tank designs made them more vulnerable to American tank destroyer tactics rather than less vulnerable. The pursuit of creating invulnerable supertanks inadvertently created vehicles that simply couldn't respond effectively to high-speed mobile warfare. In building armoured fortresses on tracks, Germany made itself vulnerable to enemies that fought more like cavalry, like racing cars mounting powerful guns that could strike hard and vanish completely before any retaliation was possible. The M18 Hellcat proved conclusively that victory on the battlefield doesn't necessarily require having the absolute best equipment available. It requires having the right equipment for the specific tactical situation, properly employed according to sound doctrine. German crews sitting in their magnificent Panthers and Tigers, vehicles that represented the peak of armoured warfare technology, were systematically defeated by American crews in vehicles that seemed impossibly vulnerable when examined on paper. It remains one of military history's great examples of proper doctrine defeating superior technology through innovative thinking. Military historian Stephen J. Zaloga characterized the M18 as poorly balanced in his technical assessments, while noting that its combat success was primarily attributable to the intensive training and dedication of its crews, rather than to what he considered its ill-conceived design. Yet this conventional assessment actually misses a crucial point about the entire concept. The poor balance that emphasized extreme speed over armor protection was precisely what enabled the revolutionary tactics that produced the highest kill-to-loss ratio of any American armored vehicle throughout World War II. For German tank crews fighting during 1944 and 1945, 3 minutes represented everything. 3 minutes from the first distant sound of high-revving American engines echoing through forests or across fields to the devastating impact of 76mm rounds slamming into their tanks. 3 minutes to identify where the threat was actually coming from, traverse their turret to face the new direction, acquire the rapidly moving target, and fire their gun accurately, all while the Hellcat was already racing toward its next firing position at 55 miles per hour. 3 minutes that usually ended with their tank erupting in flames and the Hellcat vanishing into the distance or behind cover, already seeking its next victim. The Hellcat proved definitively that in modern mechanized warfare, speed doesn't just kill enemy vehicles, it renders raw strength and heavy protection largely irrelevant. The German crews who actually survived those terrifying 3-minute encounters learned a lesson that would fundamentally reshape armored warfare doctrine in the decades to come. Sometimes the most effective armor isn't thick steel plates, but simply not being in the location where the enemy can shoot you. Sometimes the most powerful gun isn't the one with the highest muzzle velocity or largest caliber, but the one that fires from an unexpected position where the enemy doesn't anticipate the threat. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from building the strongest possible tank, but from building exactly the right tank for the specific war you're actually fighting, rather than the war you wish you were fighting. In those 3 desperate minutes lay the fundamental difference between old military thinking and new approaches, between fighting the previous war and adapting to fight the current one, between pursuing technical perfection and embracing battlefield pragmatism. The M18 Hellcat, significantly under-armoured compared to its opponents, outgunned on paper by German heavy tanks, dismissed by some military theorists as poorly designed, achieved what German supertanks ultimately could not accomplish. It achieved genuine battlefield dominance through intelligent application of speed, intensive crew training, and revolutionary tactical employment. For German tank crews who found themselves facing M18 Hellcats during those final desperate months of the war, 3 minutes felt like a lifetime of terror and confusion. For most of them, it turned out to be all the lifetime they had remaining.